Hello and welcome, my friends and viewers, to this week's episode of Legendlore, where I draw and talk about monsters, characters, gods, and other things from D&D 5th edition, all while giving a small but quickly digestible history about them. Together we're going to go over their history within the game, how they're utilized in the modern edition, and how you guys can utilize them in your own games. This week we are going to be covering Silvanus, the Oak Father and the Faerunian god of nature. Getting right into it, Silvanus' plethora of other names include the Old Oak, Old Father Tree, the Forest Father, the Tree Father, the God of Wild Nature, the Green Father, and as my players always like to refer to him eventually, Green Daddy. He carries a neutral alignment. His favorite animals are badgers and deers. His favorite fae creatures are brownies, dryads, pixies, satyrs, sprites, treants, and unicorns. His favorite weapon is a mallet or a maul, and his holy symbol is an oak leaf, sometimes accompanied by a lone acorn. In terms of appearance and powers, Silvanus is known to manifest in 3 different forms, all male, and each with their own different variety of abilities, known as the Old Father, the Young Strider, and the Horned Hunter. In his Old Father form, Silvanus appeared as a bearded man with skin like old wood, often seen either floating or sprouting from a trunk of a large tree. This unassuming form had the power to create and animate plants and fungi, as well as summon, shrink, and enlarge animals, and command the loyalty and obedience of any creature in the forest, fae included. He was often known for turning animals against their masters and for favoring tree ants as his most commonly summoned plant creature. In his Young Strider form, he stood as a long-limbed young man wearing armor formed of leaves and bark, while carrying a large wooden mallet or maul. This form was often assumed when a sacred druid grove was under attack and his worshippers needed defending, and was known to be able to control the weather to a monstrous degree. His final form, the Horned Hunter, was a silent man with burning white eyes and a set of stag antlers crowned atop his head, as well as shaggy brown fur that covered most of his body. The Horned Hunter was known for serving as a silent guide, pointing out points of interest for those who could see his shadowy form. He could also use heightened levels of telekinesis and often only spoke through telepathy to those he did speak to. As is very typical of nature deities, Silvanus is often described as chaotic and relatively unpredictable, chiefly concerned with nature and its survival. Fostering both its natural ability and its random savagery, Silvanus really didn't care of the idea of balance between nature and civilization, oftentimes bearing a violent wrath against those who would encroach upon nature's lands. As such, he seldom ever paid attention to the actions and squabbles of both mortals and gods, keeping his eye only on his faithful and those who lived within his wild domain. The only sort of order that he ever wished to maintain was the relationship between the natural cycle of life, growth and decay, water and drought, life and death. With this focus, he was often viewed as heartless and uncaring towards life, viewing the circle as more important than the idea of life itself. The one thing that he truly did hate, however, was the misuse of the natural element of fire, as well as those who used it for malevolent purposes such as destroying homes, burning people alive, and generally causing destruction. Silvanus' role as chief nature deity within the Forgotten Realms meant that he was often allied with and served by fellow deities of animals and nature, such as Eldath, who viewed him more as a father figure, and the gods Maliki and Shialia. Shanti and Lathander often served alongside him in their efforts to battle against the other gods of fury and destruction. Though Shanti's place as a goddess of agriculture, which is an ordered sense of controlling nature in a way, could possibly bring the ire or distaste of Silvanus. His greatest enemies included gods like Moander, Malar, Talina, and Talos, gods who were keen to upset the balance of nature through their own machinations. Beyond all that, Silvanus was keen to keep isolated and run his own clergy his way, only teaming up with other gods when absolutely necessary. In regards to clergy, Silvanus' faith had both clerics and druids within its fold, though the latter was a bit more present than the former. Barbarians, hermits, and rangers would also revere him in various capacities. Oftentimes, Silvanians, as they were referred to, would work alongside worshippers of Maliki and Eldath towards common goals. These often included protecting the wilderness from colonization by nearby civilization, to limiting farms or ranches to land that had already been cleared, fighting against rampant diseases, planting new plants, and fighting against those who did the bidding of the god of beasts, Malar. Some of Silvanus' holidays include Greengrass, Midsummer, and High Harvesttide, and for each of these holidays, Silvanus worshippers celebrated by either breaking or burying items that were made out of wood. Could be sculptures, could be simple twigs, whatever have you. Now, when it comes to portraying Silvanus at my table, I like to change my approach based on the needs of the party that I'm currently DMing for, as well as the setting of the game that it takes place in. If I'm running a game whose forests are mostly dangerous and unexplored, I want to channel the horror and unknowable strangeness of places like the old Appalachian Mountains. For this, I'll stick to the Horned Hunter form of Silvanus, an elk-crowned shadowy entity who can either wolf a party down, or aid them in navigating through the dark, dense forest depending on their intentions for the woods they travel through. If I'm running a game with a more calmer, understandable wilderness, I'll have Silvanus appear as both his Young Strider and Old Father forms, the former for adventurers who need direct, fast aid and a stark appearance to kick them into action, and the latter when they need simple wisdom and whimsy and require something to mellow the party out after intense sessions. The Old Father to me is kind, calm, full of wise knowledge, and older than the party could possibly know. The young Strider, on the other hand, is fiery, decisive, and often the object of affection for many players due to his handsome and brisk appearance. Hey, Asmars and Divine Soul Sorcerers have to be made somehow. Ultimately, however, Silvanus is keen to make sure that people understand that the wild nature is the natural state of the world, and that civilization, while orderly and allows people protection and assurance of food and resources, is ultimately temporary and will fall, only for the wilds to come and reclaim it back. It's a very anarchist and naturalist view depending on the level of extremism, which is interesting to explore for both good or bad reasons. Now, whenever you're making a character that worships Silvanus and you don't want to just go the pure cleric or druid route, here are a couple of different ideas that you guys can use to make characters in your games, be they PCs or NPCs. For artificers, alchemists can make great herbalists and healers under the guidance of Silvanus, especially when it comes to battling against stuff like rampant plague, blight, and disease. For barbarians, the totem warrior and the beast subclasses can call upon Silvanus' animal aspect. Storm heralds can call upon his weather-controlling young strider aspect, and wild magic barbarians can embody the powers of the nature-dwelling sylvan fae creatures. For bards, those of the College of Glamour can also draw upon the joyous performances and enthralling magic of Silvanus' fae wards, sort of like a satyr or a pan-type character dedicated to the survival and prosperity of the sylvan population. For clerics, Silvanus would sponsor clerics of the life, nature, and the tempest domain, but I could also see fringe groups of trickery, light, grave, and peace clerics also being present. Trickery would feed off the natural chaos of nature, light would focus on the idea of growth, decay, and rebirth, grave clerics would skirt the edge of life and death in order to serve nature's balance, and peace would seek to mend and tend to the relations between the wild's various factions, which can range from wild animals to literal different fae courts. In terms of druids, almost all druid subclasses fit under Silvanus' banner, with the exception of Wildfire, unless it keeps to a strict set of tenets set by the Oak Father. Again, remember, Silvanus hates the misuse of fire and its use for wanton destruction, so Wildfire druids will often find themselves walking on eggshells to be careful. Fighters under Silvanus can take the form of arcane archers or eldritch knights who swear fealty to the wild and are thus gifted with nature-aligned spells, or you can have echo knights who construct said echoes out of controlled plant matter like bark, leaves, and ivy. For monks, the Way of the Four Elements easily fits within Silvanus' tenets as wardens and masters of nature, and the Way of Mercy can foster the cycle of growth and decay in a very interesting way. For paladins, while the Oath of the Ancients is usually the obvious choice for a Silvanus-serving knight, oaths of devotion, vengeance, redemption, and the Watchers can also be sworn to the Oak Father as well. The devotion would be seen to protecting and fostering nature, the vengeance would be for a group of druids who had been slain or a grove that was burned down to the ground or otherwise destroyed, the redemption could be a knight who seeks to make amends for his destructive actions as an agent of civilization, possibly a nearby kingdom, and the Watchers could serve as a sentry against extraplanar threats to the world, such as demons, devils, and aberrations. For Rangers, all could fit under Silvanus, save for maybe Gloomstalkers whose focus is usually more on the Underdark than anything else. Most of my research hasn't bought up much in terms of how Silvanus views the Underdark, but I suppose that could be an interesting thing for you to explore at your own table. The Underdark definitely does still have plants. For rogues, scout rogues can serve as the sentries for Silvanus' druid clans and fae circles, always on the lookout for anything that could pose a danger to the woods they live in. And for sorcerers, the chaos of wild magic is very in line with Silvanus' ethos, and divine soul sorcerers, especially when they reach higher levels and gain their wings, could be excellent scions of the Oak Father. Their wings could appear to be formed of bark and covered in shimmering emerald leaves instead of feathers. I really do love that kind of aesthetic, as well as flavoring divine soul sorcerers and AMRs based on the god that they come from. Warlocks of the Archfey, Celestial, and Undying can call upon the power of Silvanus or powerful patrons who serve him. And if you really want to dive into the ancientness of Silvanus and his power in the Old Wild, the Great Old One Pact could be a very interesting way to explore that. Conjuration wizards who summon mainly fae creatures could revere Silvanus in some capacity, and transmutation and necromancer wizards who keep to his tenets on growth and decay could also be found working deep within the wilds. You could even possibly have some wizards who serve him secretly from within the stone gates of civilization, seeking to bring it down from the inside. Now that we've gotten an overview of the classes and subclasses, here's a pair of NPCs as well as a faction that you guys can use for an interesting way to introduce Silvanus into your games. The first one we have is the Green Knight. The Green Knight is a faceless man garbed in strange armor covered in tangled vines, branches, and leaves, rumored in myth to emerge from the trees themselves to combat any of those who voyage too deep into the forest with ill intent in their hearts. And for a more noble depiction, you could have a true knight garbed in bronze or brass armor with a tabard with Silvanus' leaf symbol on it, or if you want to have a more insidious approach to it, have his entire body be covered in thorns and barbs that he uses to puncture and pierce his enemies. The Green Knight mechanically can be an 8th of Ocean's Paladin, an Echo Knight, or any other martial class that uses weapons, but the core of the character is that he's otherworldly and only summoned when civilization threatens to rove over the nature that surrounds it. He rarely ever does diplomacy, as most people who encounter him do not have things to say that he wants to hear, and I've included a stat block in the description below for you guys to use in your games. The next NPC we have is Barkus the Treedancer, a powerful satyr and devout worshipper of Silvanus, often appearing as a stand-in or impersonating the god himself when approaching creatures voyaging through the woods. Using his fey magic, he appears as either young and virile or old and full of wisdom, and as such serves as a curator of sorts for the woods and the fey nestled within them. If you have a PC with a fey-aligned class, such as the Fey Wanderer, Racher, Archfey Warlock, and so on, Barkus is an excellent NPC to throw in to make future bargains, or to serve as a liaison between the player and their patron. As a speaker for both the Fey and the God of the Woods, Barkus holds little regard for anything other than belief that chaos is the natural order of the world. Lastly, for a faction for you guys to use in your games, we have the Crown of Thorns. An antagonistic faction that is aligned with Silvanus, the Crown of Thorns is a druidic circle dedicated to the absolute removal of civilization and the agents who foster its growth and encroachment. Headed by a green dryad named Mallet, who has half of her body scarred and burned from an unknown encounter with the kingdom's forces, the circle uses violence, magic, and vicious relentlessness to attack places like lumber mills, mines, water dams, farms, and even wholly armed squadrons of soldiers or scouts depending on how brave they are. Druids, rangers, barbarians, and even warlocks and wizards can be a part of this group, and the party could be called to stop these eco-terrorists by the kingdom. On the other hand, they could be called by the circle itself to provide aid, as they learn that the kingdom has been viciously draining resources and mistreating the local plants and fey while doing it. Ultimately, it's up to you how you want to take this approach, but I personally like to have a little bit of both, with the Crown of Thorns sort of being driven to extremes due to the harsh reprisals and viciousness of the kingdom around them. Next, for magic items that DMs want to give their players that may be aligned with Silvanus or could be found in places that are revering of him, such as druid groves, forest ruins, and the like, here are a couple that I personally recommend. Mostly things that keep to a stance about fostering growth and decay and the natural world, as well as resisting some of the effects of things that might not be particularly friendly from the natural world. For this week's pair of homebrew lore-based magic items, we have the Strider's Mallet and the Ward of Glades. First off, the Strider's Mallet is a +2 maul that requires attunement and a strength of 13 or higher to wield. Once per short rest, the wielder can use the mallet to cast the spell Call Lightning, and once per long rest, they can use the spell to cast the spell Control Weather. Additionally, the wielder can use the mallet to summon Silvanus' Wolfhound as a bonus action, which uses the Direwolf stat block, but instead has 60 HP, a +7 bonus to hit for their claw attacks, and has the ability to make 2 claw attacks instead of 1. The Hound remains for up to 24 hours or until the wielder is unconscious or falls to 0 HP, and upon the Wolfhound falling to 0 HP itself, returns to the mallet and cannot be summoned until the next dawn. I like to present the Strider's Mallet sort of as a badge of office when it comes to Silvanus' clergy and aligned factions. If a person is wielding it, that means that Silvanus trusts them greatly, and they would be the person to kind of order around and make the calls for these different factions. And then lastly, we have the Ward of Glades, a suit of ivy-covered wooden scale mail whose scales are carved to look like oak leaves, often seen being worn by Silvanus' young Strider form itself. This is a +3 heavy armor that is considered plate mail for the purposes of calculating armor class, and requires attunement by either a druid, ranger, barbarian, or cleric of the life, grave, or nature domains. If any PCs of these classes attune to the item and are not proficient with heavy armor, they become considered proficient with it upon attuning. The armor has 6 charges, and the wearer can cast the following spells by spending the appropriate amount of charges, and the armor regains 1d4 + 1 charges at dawn. You can cast Entangle for 1 charge, you can cast Speak with Plants for 2 charges, and you can cast the spell Tree Stride for 3 charges. I've included the stat block for both of these items in the description below. And with that, guys, that's Silvanus the Oakfather. I want to thank you guys for watching, and if you guys enjoyed the video, please like, share, and subscribe, and comment down below your guys' encounter with Silvanus and how you've used him in your games. If you guys want to vote on the next video, please follow the link in the description or press the community tab, as this week it's going to be between monsters such as the Roper, the Skeleton, and the Cataplebus. If you guys have used different versions of Silvanus in your games, please let me know how and what you guys have done with them, as well as what other stuff you guys would like to see in upcoming videos. But until then, I'll see you guys next time.